ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for watching the show. This is your Top Think Tanks review, and I'm your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today on the show, we're going to look at 5 different top 50 United States think tanks and look at the top stories from each one of their websites. To begin the show, the Brookings Institution follows protests in Morocco and explains why they will not bring about a second Arab Spring. Last week, a fish vendor was crushed by a garbage truck in Morocco after trying to retrieve his fish from the back. Authorities had confiscated the $11,000 worth of swordfish since it was out of season and threw it in the back of a garbage truck. Now, after they threw it in the back of the garbage truck, the authorities went around to the front. The vendor jumped in the back to try to retrieve his fish. They turned on the compressor and it crushed the fish vendor. Now, the Arab Spring that began in Tunisia in December 2010 and spread across much of North Africa and the Middle East share many similarities to the Moroccan protests last week and this week. Yet there is one major difference between 2010-2011 and today. While the promises of the Arab Spring quickly faded across the region, the popular revolts left one lasting legacy: a fundamental shift in the relationship between the governments and the governed, and a recognition by Arab leaders that they too might suffer the same fate of Muammar Gaddafi. Now, the parallels between the Moroccan fish vendor and the Tunisian fruit seller whose death started the Arab Spring are numerous. Both come from poor, marginalized regions of the respective states. Both suffered from mistreatment by the authorities that threatened their livelihoods. And both of their deaths resonated with many of their compatriots who saw their situation as representative of a larger problem of inequality, corruption, and injustice at the hands of the state. This wave of protests is likely to subside with little lasting effect for multiple reasons. First, the Moroccan government is experienced in handling protests, as evidenced by the Arab Spring. Though Morocco did not witness the same level of protests in 2011 as Tunisia and Egypt, starting in February 2011, tens of thousands of mostly young Moroccans carried out a series of protests in more than 50 towns across the country, calling for a limit to the king's power and the election of an empowered parliament. Second, the Moroccan political system is under a lesser level of threat than the 2011 Tunisian or Egyptian governments because it is a monarchy. Now, there's an investigation going into the death of this fish vendor, and some security authorities actually have been arrested due to this. They're calling it an accidental homicide. So hopefully they can get some justice out of this for the fish vendor's family, and hopefully the protest can bring about a little bit of the reform to the government, to the monarchy government in Morocco. But like a lot of other governments and a number of other countries, we'll keep our eye on the Moroccan government and Morocco and see if things change for the better. Now next, Human Rights Watch calls out the Burmese government again for its abuses, although this time it is not against the Rohingya. Now, the Burmese government should urgently act to end the unlawful seizure of land in the Karen state. Officials regularly charge villagers with criminal trespassing if they refuse to leave land, and in one case, police torched a village. Militia commanders have also used threats, force, and arbitrary arrests to intimidate farmers and take land, particularly in areas still contested by ethnic Karen armed groups. Now, farmers in Burma's Karen state are being pushed off their land and then face arrest and prison time if they stand up for their rights, said Phil Robertson, Deputy Asia Director for Human Rights Watch. Well-connected business owners, militia leaders, and government officials are exploiting land laws and regulatory weakness to obtain land with little regard for the rights of the farmers who have been long using it. The 65-page report titled "The Farmer Becomes the Criminal: Land Confiscation in Burma's Karen State" documents human rights violations by militias, police, and government officials in Karen State for the confiscation of land from ethnic Karen farmers, many of whose families had farmed the land for generations. Farmers' livelihoods are threatened by abusive laws passed by previous governments, enforcement of poorly conceived land policies, and the authorities' unwillingness to counter corrupt local officials who facilitate the displacement of small-scale farmers.
In Burma, 70% of the people make their living through farming, so land is the key to their livelihoods. Karen State is a fertile area on Burma's border with Thailand. With Burma's democratic opening, the area is attracting mining, tourism, large-scale agricultural development, and also industrial zone development. And as a result of that, local officials and crony capitalists are pushing people off land they've cultivated for generations. In some cases, police or border guard officials are using threats or force to take people's land and drive them out of their homes. Farmers who continue to work the land will certainly face trespassing charges. Farmers who organize protests and participate in protests will face arrest and lengthy court battles. Land grabs like this are happening in much of the country. The government says that they're promoting development and the villagers don't have legal right to the land. As Burma opens up to economic opportunity and investment, the government needs to make sure that development projects benefit everyone and that farmers are not left without land and livelihoods.
So like the Rohingya in Rakhine State, we hope the Burmese government stops abusing their power and the rights of these farmers and villagers. Now next, the Council on Foreign Relations unveils the hidden refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. While much attention is rightly focused on Syria and the Middle East, there are a growing number of refugees in the Western Hemisphere. The largest group comes from Central America's Northern Triangle, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. For each of the past 3 years, between 300,000 and 450,000 Central Americans have fled north. Of these, between 45,000 and 75,000 are unaccompanied children. Another 120,000 to 180,000 are families, usually a mother with children, and between 130,000 to 200,000 are single adults. These numbers peaked in May and June in 2014 when more than 8,000 unaccompanied minors crossed the U.S. border each month. 2016 numbers are again rising, with August inflows higher than they've ever been before. Now, these migrants are fleeing violence. El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala are some of the most dangerous nations in the world. Poverty and the economic devastation wrought after 3 years of record droughts as well. They are pulled to the United States through personal ties. One study of interviewed minors found 90% had a mother or father in the United States. Many of these U.S. residents from Honduras and El Salvador came on temporary protected status visas, or TPS visas, meaning they can live and work legally in the United States, but may not sponsor other family members, including their children. So, while there's all this going on in the Middle East with the offensive in Mosul, the displacement of the 1.2 million people of the Mosul city, the refugees in Afghanistan, the refugees in Syria, we have a refugee crisis here in the United States to our south, as they are coming up from Central America. So once we fix the refugee crisis in the Middle East, there's another one waiting for us right here back at home. Now next, the Rand Corporation asked the question, is al-Nusra stronger than ever? 3 months after it split from Al-Qaeda, which in reality is simply a feint, Jabhat Fateh al-Sham, or the JFS, formerly known as Jabhat al-Nusra, may pose a more significant long-term threat to the West than the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. While the West targets ISIS, JFS is quietly laying the groundwork for Al-Qaeda's resurgence by hunkering down, rebuilding, and repositioning itself along several fronts. This should come as no surprise. Al-Qaeda and its affiliates are nothing if not resilient. With approximately 10,000 fighters, JFS is now both the largest Al-Qaeda franchise and by many accounts the most lethal. As a failed state on the periphery of Europe, Syria is the ideal staging ground for Al-Qaeda to rejuvenate its global campaign of terrorism through JFS. Veteran al-Qaeda leaders like Saif al-Adal are thought to be among the current leadership directing JFS strategy in Syria. A critical centerpiece of this strategy is seeking consent of locals and working to garner political legitimacy in Sunni-dominated parts of northwest Syria, where JFS has established an enclave. Now, this approach stands out in stark juxtaposition to ISIS's ultra-violent scorched earth campaign. JFS has benefited from the combined Western and Russian campaign against ISIS, as it has allowed the al-Qaeda splinter to survive and thrive. So while everybody's focused on ISIS, everyone's like, oh, we gotta kill ISIS, we gotta destroy ISIS, we gotta take Mosul, there is another group just like ISIS, just as bad as ISIS, who is 10,000 soldiers strong now, who is gathering the ISIS soldiers who are deserting or escaping Mosul or just running away. They're gathering all these people up and they're creating yet again another terrorist organization. This is one thing that is hard to quash, ladies and gentlemen. Terrorist groups, you just can't go in and retake a city that's their main stronghold and be like, yeah, we won, it's over. No, unfortunately, it's not over, and it's gonna be ground zero in Syria for the next terror group to take place. So if we don't play our cards right, Russia and the United States, we're not gonna solve anything by getting rid of ISIS, because you're just gonna replace ISIS with the JFS. So, again, Russia and the United States really need to tread carefully and figure out what is the right thing to do to prevent these terror groups to continue to form. Now, to end the show, Freedom House issued a statement in response to the police raid of Turkey's oldest newspaper and continued use of power during the state of emergency it declared following the attempted coup in July. Now, we've touched on this a number of times in earlier segments, how in July, after the coup failed, the government issued a state of emergency for 90 days, which gave them executive power to pretty much do anything without any repercussions. And after that 90 days was up, 3 months later, they issued another 90-day state of emergency. On October 31st, police raided the offices of Cumhuriyet, excuse me if I don't get that pronunciation right, Turkey's oldest newspaper, detaining 13 staff members, including the editor, a columnist, and a cartoonist. Now, the previous editor of the old newspaper was convicted of revealing state secrets in May and is now living in exile in Europe. Turkey's government is attacking the press to a degree that not seen since the military coup in 1980, and in the process undermining the foundations of democracy, said Daniel Kalingart, acting president. By raiding the newspaper and closing news agencies under the pretext of emergency rule, this government is demonstrating again its utter disrespect for fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. The United States should exert every effort to stop its NATO ally from becoming a dictatorship. Over the weekend, the government used its power under emergency rule to close 15 pro-Kurdish news outlets, including 2 news agencies and 2 national newspapers. So, Turkey is a NATO ally of the United States, so the US does have some power here, does have some say to kind of control this country from becoming a dictatorship, all because of the coup. However, then you run into the issue of there's the gentleman who is believed to have organized the coup is living here in the United States. So you're kind of again on the show, ladies and gentlemen, it just seems like a common theme. We find ourselves between a rock and a hard place. So what's the United States to do? Can you come in and stop what they're doing on the state of emergency? Probably, but they're going to want the guy that's living in, I believe it's Pennsylvania, who is believed to have organized the failed military coup that happened in July. So again, we're going to keep updating you on Turkey and what happens in Turkey. So some interesting things going on there, in the US in a very weird position. But ladies and gentlemen, that does it for your Top Think Tanks review. I want to thank you for watching. You can find the links directly to all of these articles below in the description. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, give us a like on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter. But thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.